Welcome, everybody. Thank you for your patience. I'm Ludivine Wolsik. I'm the Executive Director of FACNI, the French-American Chamber of Commerce of New England. We are a non-profit organization supporting the launch and development of French companies here in New England. I would like to thank our board member, Frédéric Chanfraud, who is our host tonight, and also the CIO for Citizens Bank. This is the last hybrid event of our HR forum. Cliff will introduce himself, but he's the chair of this forum. And we are going to speak about again, the influence of COVID on our work-life balance. But I'm going to give the floor to our dear member, Cara, an active member of the HR Forum for the introduction.
Okay. Actually, Cliff is going to introduce the HR Forum a little bit and introduce me, and then I'll introduce our panelists. Thank you, Ludwig.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome. I'm glad you could all join us today. As the HR Forum for FACNI, our main mission is to provide education to members of FACNI, whether you're in a leadership position or whether you're in individual contributor position. Our goal is to provide you what you need as a leader or individual in an organization when it comes to HR issues that are very common and very topical today. So for the last year and a half, we've focused most of our programs around COVID and the issues that employers have had to face with COVID when we were all at home and then when we all came back. And so we're finishing up our conversations around COVID and the struggles that employers are having with this program. And we have great panelists who are going to share their experiences, and hopefully folks can come away with tools and tips that they can use in their organization around what some of the difficulties that everyone is facing. So glad you could join us today, and we look forward to seeing you at some of our other events.
Okay. So I'm Cara Lund. I've been a longtime member of the FACNI, and I just want to stand up so I can see everybody. And I'm going to introduce our speakers and panelists in brief so that we can save time for the content. So I would encourage you to go onto the FACNI website to read their full bios. So with a PhD in biopsychology and over 20 years of experience in healthcare and biotech, Dr. Angela Justice currently serves as the Chief People Officer at TCR Squared Therapeutics in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where they work to save lives by transforming the field of cancer immunotherapy. Prior to TCR Squared, Angela held positions at Surgery Partners, Biogen, and EMD Serono, among others. Frédéric Chanfraud is the Chief Information Officer of Citizens Commercial Bank and our gracious host, where he manages all the applications used by Citizens Commercial customers. Prior to Citizens, Frédéric oversaw all IT global services for Schneider Electric and has held positions at Arthur Andersen as well as Ernst & Young. Currently leading Inclusion and Wellbeing, Alban Jacquin has held several positions at Schneider Electric since joining corporate communications in 2006 and has even written speeches for the CEO. Alban really likes to walk his talk when it comes to his commitment to energy management and sustainability to improve everyone's lives. So, as I mentioned, you can go onto the website to read about all of their professional and academic achievements. But what really struck me about these three in speaking with them was their curiosity in how they interact with the world and how they express themselves through movement. Frédéric has a need for speed. He's a guy that wants to fly, whether it's either piloting a plane in the air or whether it's in his souped-up Miata on a race course. He's someone that loves speed and wants to fly. Alban, in comparison, really likes his feet on the ground. He's a marathon runner and triathlete. He is a Reiki master and yoga practitioner and a self-described recovering sneaker addict. So, regardless of a shortage on toilet paper, if we ever come to a shortage on sneakers, we know where to go to find some.
Size 9.
Size 9, exactly, that helps. And Angela challenges herself in the water by scuba diving and deep diving, right? Is that correct? Deep diving. Another really interesting thing about Angela is that she keeps bees on a rooftop somewhere in downtown Boston. So if you're walking through Boston and you hear the buzz of bees, just look up and it's probably Angela tending to her bees and her tomatoes.
Thank you for doing that.
Yes,
Very important.
exactly, it is very important. So all three of them dare to be curious. They have energy that cannot be contained. And they achieve extraordinary things as a result of it. And that's why I think we're going to have a wonderful conversation this evening. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
I would too. Shall we begin?
We should begin right now.
All right, let's do
We've
it.
got great questions for people,
Okay.
our panelists to answer.
So our first question is for all three of you. Some companies are looking at the question about whether to bring employees back as simply a binary decision. And Elon Musk's most recent announcement is evidence of this all or nothing approach. So my question for you is what and whom are driving those decisions for your organization? And given the emphasis on employee health and well-being, has HR taken on a more expansive role in the wake of these decisions? And do you think that might continue moving forward? And Angela, you had a really fun answer to this question, so I'd love for you to begin.
Well, I think there's a lot that drives these decisions, and certainly Elon Musk can take a very strong and perhaps somewhat polarizing view. I think for TCR Squared and our company, we really view our relationship with our employees more as a partnership. Right? We're really there because we are trying to cure cancer, and that takes all of us, and it takes all of us working in a way that is going to achieve those mutual ends. And, to the extent that, of who is driving that decision, I think HR, of course, takes a critical role in that. And if HR hasn't had a critical role at the table in your organizations, or if you are an HR practitioner and don't feel like you have that role, boy, the COVID pandemic certainly gave room and gave the space and the opportunity to seize and demand and own that role, which I think is absolutely critical. But again, I view it absolutely as a partnership. I think driving that conversation and driving it from the seat of the people, culture, focus is really important. But again, we don't view it as binary because it has to be in partnership with the employees. It has to be a way of working that we can all commit to and accomplish our shared objectives and goals.
Frederick, would you like to weigh in?
Sure, absolutely. So I think the situation for citizens is a bit different, and it's different based on what kind of role you're in.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a branch, fortunately, you need to be in the branch because you need to serve the clients. If you're in a call center, you need to be in a call center. If not, no one's going to answer the phone. If you're a banker or a relationship manager, we actually don't want you in the office. We didn't want you in the office before. We want you to be back on the road
Okay.
and having conversation with your clients. If you're in a support function, like it's the case for technology or many other functions like HR as well, procurement and many others, the position of the bank is we would like you to come back because we are convinced there is some benefits of having everyone in the same office at the same time. But we've adopted an approach which was not mandatory and a bit more flexible than what we used to do in the past. So we don't ask people to be 5 days in the office. You can be there 3 days, 1 or 2 days, or fully remote. And we've shifted very significantly the mix between the three categories. Now, the role of HR is paramount there. So they are driving this return to the office type of initiative. And they are the one also directly in touch with the governors of the various states in which the bank is, because we've been capturing their guidance and applying them in every single location of the bank. And for the funny or not so funny story, we decided 3 years ago to massively invest in our colleague well-being, and we built 2 brand new campuses one in Johnston, Rhode Island, and one in Dedham, Mass. So we have state-of-the-art facility. We rebuilt and redid the rest of the facility, so our colleagues will be well. And the pandemic happened, and those beautiful campuses are unfortunately empty in some ways. So that's the reason why we are welcoming people back, and we are trying to have people the same days, so we create this kind of interaction between the various departments.
That's great.
Yeah, from a Schneider Electric perspective, something which is important to understand is that Schneider is 50% blue collars, 50% white collars, give or take. For those of you who don't know us, which is probably a lot of you, because we are not so well-known company, we're making money saving the world by providing energy management solutions for digitization and sustainability. And the situation, like Frédéric said and Angela, is different by persona. Let's say if you take the shop floor employees, we were like labeled as critical workers during the pandemic, so they had to be there. So there was no question. So there was a lot to do on health and safety. Even after some of the restrictions were lifted, people were still there. And what they want as flexibility is, and I was visiting some plants and distribution centers recently, they told me, we don't care about 3 days, 2 days extra, we cannot do it anyway. What we want is that when we show up for our shifts, we're going to have enough parts to finish our shifts, because otherwise we have to go home in the middle of a shift because there's not enough parts, supply chain issues. So it's a lot about all people in charge of production making the right anticipation, etc. That's what's going to drive their well-being. For our white collars employees, which is about 70,000 worldwide, we did a COVID survey instead of our regular employee engagement survey mid-2020 or October 2020, and we designed a hybrid work policy based on that, beginning of 2021 effective, which was a 3 days to 2 days policy. So that's the rule that we want, because our CEO is very adamant on the fact that innovation, or let's say a serendipitous innovation, happens at the water cooler or in those kind of interactions. So we want to have that. Now, is it in effect everywhere? No, it's not. People are still wanting more flexibility. So because 2022 seems like a decade, since mid-2020, we want to do another survey like that, and also take into account what we talked about, the Tesla example. But so that made the big headline because it's Elon Musk and he makes the headlines. But Google did the same before. They announced that, and there was a big backlash. Apple did the same, big backlash, so they stepped back. And now they said 3 days, maybe 2. And only, I think, Goldman Sachs were the only one who said everybody has to go back, and they stood their ground. And they faced, despite the backlash, they stood their ground. So for me, it's about finding that balance between those serendipitous interactions and the need for people to be there versus the flexibility. And it's also to put into perspective with the war for talents. Because today you cannot really hire, people have so many opportunities that if you put constraints on, no, we need you to be there that much, etc., they're going to go for the companies that offer a good job, but also more flexibility. So we are revising what we call new ways of working around that part. So not only from a well-being perspective, but also simply from an attraction and retention perspective.
Great.
So is HR playing a larger and more expansive role in that decision-making, or is it largely driven by the CEO?
Oh, no, 100%. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, definitely. We have a seat at the table, and if we had it before, but now it's been even more strategic, and I think we gain credibility thanks to what we did during the pandemic.
Okay, great. Some say that we're experiencing a bit of a foundational shift, and others see the post-COVID work life as a bit of a trend that might not continue. So what are your thoughts on this? And in bringing people back, what has worked and why? Frédéric, would you like to start with this one?
Sure. So I think you see 2 trends. So there's a post-pandemic one, and you have the great resignation that we are facing right now. And it's true in a lot of area. Technology is one of them. So if you see banking as a whole, I think the average attrition rate across the board in all the banks in the US is around 20.2%. We're doing slightly better in citizens of our peer banks, but in technology, it's probably even north of that. So we see a lot of mobility around the workforce. A lot of them are actually telling us that they want more flexibility, a better work-life balance. They don't want to spend time commuting back and forth. And that's the way we're living in. And either you change and you bring more flexibility in your policy, or you face the risk that people are going to have an offer on the next bank, and then they're going to be a little bit more flexible, and they're going to pick that up because it's as important for them are their benefits and salary and things like that. So I really think this is a long-term trend that we're seeing right now. I think it's going to be very difficult to bring people back in the office 5 days per week. So I think it's going to be a long-lasting effect on the entire not only banking industry, but I think for me in the world.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think this is one of these things that's going to be hard to dial back to what it was pre-pandemic. I just think it's been a fundamental shift in how people work and how people think about work, and also how employers are making asks really of their employees are making asks of their employees around their work life situations. And I think that can be a really good thing, right? I think it forces, again, a greater partnership between the employee and employer. Now, what I find interesting, though, is a little bit of some contrary stuff. So you have employees, there's a great deal of employees obviously looking for new roles. And I hear some of that is because they're looking for more culture or a different culture fit. And then you have employees, right, in probably equal numbers saying that, you know, they really need to be able to work from home. They need this great flexibility. They don't want to be in the office. It's really hard as an employer to drive great culture if you don't have the opportunity to bring people together. Now, those things, you can juxtapose that and it can work, but I think you have to do it mindfully. I don't think you can have, you know, this demand to be remote and work home and demand all this, you know, employee-led design, and then also complain that you don't have the same level of engagement and culture and all of that happening. So I think we have to find the right equilibrium there, and I don't think we're quite there yet. I think it's a struggle. I see heads nodding around the room, so it looks like this is something that people appreciate or are experiencing. I think it's something that we'll be solving together.
Quick question for you, Angela. Has the, and this is for all three of you, has the issue or the discussion around managers having the capacity and the capability to build engagement when people are coming back, because people are coming back looking for that. Has that been a topic of conversation or an issue in your organization, and how have you handled that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of my fundamental beliefs around culture, productivity, performance, all of it really is that managers are force multipliers, right? If you invest disproportionate, you know, just effort in your managers, you're going to reap these disproportionate rewards. The return is, you know, 10x, let's say. And so we have definitely put a lot of care, thought, and intention around developing our managers and our leaders to make sure, you know, in the early days that they were able to engage remotely. And then as, you know, and again, in biotech, we've had a lot of people in the office all the time. Our scientists are in the lab, you know, working hard. This hasn't been they're gone and now they're back. It's been kind of a shifting paradigm. But bringing more of the folks back that is, you were saying, are in the support roles, we have spent some time investing in our managers, making sure that they're engaging people and that they're really working now to this more hybrid environment than fully remote or fully in person. And I don't think it's a one-time investment. I think you have to make frequent investments in your managers and in carrying those messages and helping them, providing them the tools and resources to actually pull that work through. That's I think that's a big area of focus.
I would agree with Angela, and I think we actually did two things. We started by training the managers on how they can manage a remote workforce. They were not used to it. And now we're training them on how you can engage hybrid workforce when you have some of them remote, some of them are in the office. And it's not easy, and again, depending on where people sit, it can be a very different experience. And you have some people who want to be in the office after being living out of their house for a year and a half. Others don't. So managing this kind of different situation in the same team is not necessarily easy.
Yeah, and I don't want to spill on one of the next question, but I come from a learning background before taking that role, and so the learning piece on remote working, hybrid working has been key, but it's also how to train managers on being inclusive of a hybrid team. Because sometimes, I'm sure we all have been in that situation where you have a meeting like this one, where you have the majority is here and some on the phone, but then you have side conversation going on in the room, the people feel completely left out, etc. So it's how you make sure that managers are being mindful of that so that they are including everyone. And paradoxically, we have actually seen a rise of cases on our, what you call a trust line, people feeling excluded or even microaggression or stuff like that remotely, which you would think would be the opposite, but those feelings are amplified when people are in, by themselves and they cannot read the body language, etc. So it's something we have to be even more attentive. And I think in terms of your original question on not that much what worked and what not, because on that I would completely agree with what Fred and Angela said, but the fundamental change, I think, is the trust. And again, take the analogy of learning. Before, people were like, oh, I would go to in-person learning because e-learning doesn't work, etc. And then because we were forced to do that during the pandemic, and we saw that even synchronous digital learning worked pretty well, now this ship has sailed. Like nobody's going to come back to 90% in-class learning versus 10% digital, cost-wise, but also because we saw the efficiency. And it's the same for remote working. Like now, a lot of people were reluctant, or managers or organizations were reluctant. They were like, oh, can we trust people, etc. Now we've seen it, we can. So it's about how do we manage that so that we continue to build on that trust and we actually not creating conditions where we exclude some people.
That's such an important point, and I think that extends to all of this, right? Like having trust. We saw trust increase, I think, when managers, CEOs, leaders had to send their employees home, right? And they saw, to your point, the work got done, things work, things can still happen. Having that trust and continuing to build and reinforce that trust, that's capital, right? That's the capital of the workplace, I think, these days.
Alban, this next question is for you. How to stabilize an unstable workforce is a hot topic. So what type of retention program did Schneider have before the pandemic, and how have you adjusted the retention program, if you have, to be more agile, to keep employees?
Yeah, that's a very vast question. In terms of macro situation, the war for talent was raging before because we're more and more a tech company and a software company, and we're not competitive on that market because the Googles and Facebook of the world, well, they offer more shares. I would say that all shares are better than the Facebook and Google one, especially right now, much more stable. But still, they offer way more shares than we do. So we're still not that competitive on that market. So we have to find other ways, which is around security, career development, international assignments, etc. But one of the things that we are unequivocally pushing is pay equity. So, and that has paid off. Our pay equity ratio is in the 1% margin between men and women. And we are not looking just at women and men. It's men and women versus men. It's men and women. So, and we had the 1% margin that took us around 10 years to get there. So that was a basic, and people know that. There's transparency. There's like a allocation for every salary review cycle to bridge the gaps where they are. So that's one of the retention thing. And the other aspect is really about career development. So Now we have internal gigs that people can do so that they don't want to change job and spend 10 or 20% of their time on roles. They have mentoring. They can access to anybody who wants to mentor in the company, and we have more like selective mentoring for global talent pool, which is identified as high potential. Because the number one thing that leaders were saying is that they were lacking development opportunities. Now, with the pandemic happening, we also had in parallel of that a multi-hub strategy where we wanted to gather our main talents in hubs. Like in the US, it would be Nashville and Boston. Globally, it would be Europe, like Western Europe, India, China, etc. Now we are reshuffling that because talents have a choice. And with the work from anywhere or 90 days vacation or it's called leisure, I think like business leisure, where like you can work from the Bahamas for 3 weeks or something like that, like Airbnb is doing. This multi-hub strategy is not working. If the talent we need, especially with the scarcity of talents, we need a software engineer with very good, or electronics is a big thing for us right now. You need a specialist in electronics. If they are in Cincinnati, we have to hire them in Cincinnati, no matter that. So we are really bending that because otherwise we're not going to be able to have the right workforce.
I think the topic of retention is a difficult one for many leaders of organizations to have to tackle today because of the finances. Typically, people are thinking of retention strategies of providing some sort of additional compensation to hold the employee at the organization. But I think what you're suggesting is that there are other alternatives besides money, and career development is a really great one to be able to offer that and have a really good program for employees to take advantage of. When you look at the statistics of people who left the organizations and said on their exit interview, I'm leaving for more money, but then were later surveyed independent of their organization, it's because of career development. My manager failed to recognize my messages about wanting more or needing more growth. And that's why I ultimately left, but I said it was because of money. So I applaud Schneider Electric for doing that. That's great.
It's a journey. We know we're not there yet, and I just add that we see a slightly different attrition rate between men and women. Women is higher, and also for younger generations. So we have to be very attentive to that. We don't have any solutions today for on the women's side, and it actually works for everybody and also early careers. We beefing up the benefits. We are redesigning our global family leave policy to make it more inclusive and call that a global flexible care policy. 2 weeks care, 2 weeks bereavement, even for pets. The care leaves are also for grandparents to care for the grandkids. And the parental leave is, we are not going full gender neutral because with bigly blue collars, and it would be a problem to have like 20 weeks for blue collars and white collars, but we are doubling almost the number of weeks for the secondary parents, and we are making that completely inclusive, so it doesn't have to be men and women, it's whatever is your relationship, and that helps. It's not making a difference compared to like the overall compensation, etc. But when you are at par on that, then it's the defining factors that make people stay.
Can I just add one more thing? I think
sure.
There's so much talk about the Great Resignation and this high turnover. I always find it really interesting to flip those kinds of questions on their head and think about not why people leave, but why people stay.
Right.
And I think that if you start there, you can get to some really interesting answers. And I think, to your point upon career development, it's so critical, right? I think manager support, people, again, they very rarely leave for compensation. They generally leave because they don't feel like they have support. They don't have growth opportunities. They don't have development. So if you think about those that stay and what they're being provided, and you try to amplify that with your existing employees, and again, focus on your managers, train them to have those conversations with their employees. What will keep you here, right? Like, what is keeping you here today? What will keep you here tomorrow? Those can go a really long way. And the investment is just a bit of time and a bit of care and listening. It's really not, financially, it's certainly not a challenge to implement a program like that.
And
go ahead. Yeah, I agree with you. We start seeing those I will not say behavior, but we start having some people with some niche skills, specifically in tech, where it's very difficult to get them. And because their talent is scarce, then they receive a lot of phone calls. It's not something that you can unfortunately prevent. In some area, you have the Amazon of the world, Salesforce, people who are calling them. They're offering them almost 100% more than what they are making with you, even if they like their manager, they like the work-life balance you're giving them. They look at their career perspective and say, do I stay with the bank? I'm good there, but I can make twice more money there, and it's a big name, it's going to look good on my resume. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to find this kind of situation. So.
We were just talking about that actually, even in biotech, right? You have companies like Moderna or Pfizer who are ramping up significantly to meet the needs of the pandemic and throwing massive paychecks and titles at people because they needed that help. And sometimes that's hard to say no to, for sure. But again, I think if you think about what embeds your employees in your organization, you can't always keep them, right? There's not everybody. But if you try to focus on those behaviors, at least you can.
Agreed.
Go for an 80-20 on it.
And the money is short-lived because you're immediately creating pay equity issues. And especially if you're an organization that has lots of locations around the United States, the cost of living is also very different. And then when you add the international component to it, that makes it even more difficult. So I'm weary of the future for those people who are jumping ship and saying, yes, I'll take 100% more than what I'm making now. Yes, that's great, and that might help you in the short term because you might need the money or whatever. But 2 to 3 years out, how can the company sustain that?
I don't know, in some cases managed by people who are making less than the new hires.
Right, well, that's the pay equity issue. That's very hard.
Unintended consequences abound.
What was that?
Unintended consequences
Yes.
abound.
Exactly.
And some companies are actually creating precedents right now. I don't remember who just announced that they will allow their employees to relocate anywhere in the US and pay them the same. So if you're in LA today and you want to work from the Pennsylvania office or Iowa or whatever, then you could. So yeah, to your point, like what midterm, what would that look like on the bottom line, but also in general on the equity within the company? It's interesting.
So the next question is really jumping a little bit deeper into some of the issues that companies are facing today with employees coming back to work. And now people have learned how. Organizations have had to learn how to work differently, and employees have had to learn how to work differently. So we put together 6 main topics that companies are struggling with today. And our panelists, some of them have some solutions or how they've handled it. And I'll read the categories off and then we can just jump right into it. So the big conversation that organizations are struggling with is collaboration and team building. And so we touched on this a little bit about people coming back and how do we engage them. That's the second one. How do you bring people back for 3 days and what are they going to do in the office that is not the same as what they did when we were all there 5 days a week? Retention, which we touched on. How do you handle that? And in an organization like Schneider and Citizens with hundreds and thousands of employees, you can't do it financially. Innovation is a really big issue today. The serendipitous innovation, words you used, is a very, very difficult topic that executives are struggling with. The way they struggle with it is to just demand that people come back to the office. But I think below that is this issue of not being able to put their finger on the innovation and how it's lost because it's just not happening. And diversity, equity, and inclusion is, of course, more amplified than it was before because of how people are treating each other when they're working remotely and coming into the office, aside from the other issues that equity and inclusion have brought forth. And last is, with all of these changes that everybody has had to endure, mental health and resilience and your mental well-being is very difficult today. And people are affected by it in the smallest way and the largest way. And so we're going to have to manage that consequence as a result of COVID and what we had to go through. But it's very difficult as an organization. So the first one is collaboration and team building. Fred, if you want to start with some of the things that your organization did around that topic, that would be great.
I think the first thing, you unfortunately experienced that today, everyone started to use WebEx. We had to suddenly migrate all of our population remotely, which was quite a difficult task to undertake for any kind of technology organization, which means in a matter of 4 days, we had to completely revamp everything, the plumbing of the network to sourcing thousands of laptops that we can ship all over the country so people could continue to work. I think now everyone is pretty used to WebEx when it works well. I still have the feeling there is some stuff which you cannot really do with some of the collaborating tools that we're using. So typically you want to, it's probably linked to the innovation topic, you want to do a whiteboarding session. Doing that remotely is going to be extremely difficult. It's way more easy to do that when you have everyone in a room, you have a whiteboard, and I know there is some tech solution you can use. I'm sure some people around the room here are providing that, but I still have the feeling that this kind of interaction is not exactly the same. It's more difficult, takes a bit more effort, and making sure people stay engaged and in the process is not necessarily that easy when you have the dog barking or the kids, working around the room where you're working. But I still think that now it's part of the new normal. Everyone knows how to use most of those tools. I still bring some benefits of having everyone in the same place at the same time, because nothing can replace popping up your head in the office next to you and say, oh, by the way, I got a question for you, versus doing a 30-minute meeting, finding time in the calendar so we can have this kind of interaction there. So I think we learned a lot. We learned that we can work collaboratively being fully remote. It was pretty scary at the beginning of the pandemic. We learned also that there is some advantages of bringing back everyone in the same room sometimes to engage the people more, do some whiteboarding or innovation session, or create this kind of relationship that you need to build between the people. And it's quite one thing having a toast and a wine virtual event through WebEx or Zoom. I think it's not as good as having everyone in the same room and having a chit chat, with a glass of wine or a beer in your hand.
Great, thanks. What are some of the things you did at TCR Squared, Angela?
To drive team building and collaboration.
Yeah.
Well, I think, during the height of the pandemic, we of course relied on all of the collaboration tools and Zoom, and I think we got a bit zoomed out probably. But even now, as we are more back in the office, and again, it's very hybrid. So we'll have some folks not in the office, some in the office, some in different geographies. And by the way, we're a company of about 150 people, so we're at a very different size and scale here. But I think the learnings are still that they're sharing. I think we all share some of the same things. We leverage some of the capabilities of Zoom to do little breakout rooms and bigger meetings. So you can't get that small chit-chatty in-person, pop your head in the door, but you can pull different people into little breakout rooms and tackle problems together. I agree, the virtual whiteboarding just doesn't work the same. It just really doesn't. So when we need sessions where we do need that innovation, we need people working together on a problem, we schedule those, and then we schedule other things around. So we give people a real reason to be together and try to maximize that time and that space. And then really, again, it all comes down to training the managers and leaders to be really effective at driving engagement and team building, and really relying on them as your front line in getting those employees engaged and having that cultural sense kind of pulled through.
So it's been, let's call it 2 years or however long we want to put a measuring stick next to it. Around engagement, can you share an example or two that you have seen, let's call it this year, that is working in your organization and you can see a shift and more engagement that's occurring?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if I can speak to anything specifically that's changed this year. I will say,
or even last year.
Yeah, I will say we do an annual engagement survey, and somewhat to my surprise, we saw our engagement scores go up 15% on average.
Wow.
During the pandemic. So I think leveraging some of these tools really did work. I think the most two effective things that we did, one, every Friday we have a company meeting. We get every employee to call in. It's a Zoom meeting. It's a virtual meeting. Even if folks are in the office, they're dialing into the Zoom. And they hear from leaders, they hear from other employees. We just do some fun kind of chit-chatty stuff in the beginning, and then we break people out into small breakout rooms, and we spread the leaders around. So it's a random grouping of people, lots of different levels, lots of functions, and really just use that as an opportunity to engage, to collaborate, to talk, to get to know one another, because those human connections really matter, and that carries through in the rest of the work. And then the other thing I think we do that's really effective and similar is for our managers. Every month we do what we call a manager meetup. We just invite all of our managers from C-suite all the way down. So it's literally every level. And we talk about the issues that are most pressing to our managers. So again, this is where we talk about shifting to a remote workforce. How do you engage your team remotely? How do you bring them back? How do you engage them this way? What is embeddedness, and how do you create those connections to keep folks engaged in their seats? So those two things, I think, really bringing people together for conversation have worked quite well.
Great. And at Citizens, Fred, do you have some examples to share about changes in engagement?
I'm going to give you two examples. One more recent. It's something we are doing the same type of measurement. We use what is called OHI, Organizational Health Index. And we've seen constant progress over the last few years. And we actually didn't see any type of deep or decrease during the pandemic. We maintained the same score. We actually improved it slightly. We're already in what they call the best quartile, so it's going to be more difficult for us to make a lot of sizable progress, but we didn't see any kind of dip. So we continue to measure that on a quarterly basis. We do what we call Let's Connect session, where we have a couple of leaders and we are engaging employees from the company. It's an open communication. They can ask any question they want. Sometimes we have the answer, sometimes we don't. We also take the opportunity to get their feedback, and we consolidate that, and we use that more. We consolidate it globally, and we try to take some action so we can continue to improve the engagement of people. Now, I'm going to give you a counter example a little bit where at the beginning of the pandemic, you're probably familiar with the PPP program. That was a very painful moment for the bank. because suddenly we had to automate some processes where doing loans with the SBA, we are doing 500 per year, and we had 25,000 to spin up in a matter of 3 weeks. So that's a moment where you need to have everyone on deck, all hands on deck. You're working 18 hours per day, 7 days per week for several weeks, and you need to have everyone alive.
You just got to do it.
You just get to do it. But the funny part in it is people had such a sense of passion about what they were doing. I'm doing that. By doing that, I'm going to save some jobs. I'm going to help companies, continue to pay their employees even if they're closing. Sure. This kind of sense of, purpose was fantastic. And actually, the issue was the other way around. So we needed them to slow down at the point of time because they were burning themselves out. We were not pushing them. We were trying to hold them and say, okay, enough. This weekend you're not. Yeah, but we need to do for it. No. This weekend you're doing nothing. Wow. And we had to push them the other way around, asking them, no, you need to disengage now. You need to take some time for yourself, for your family, for your mental health, because you're going to burn out if you continue at that rhythm. So it's a bit of a counterexample, but sometimes, being purpose-driven makes miracle, but you need to make sure people are, balancing their life and work in a way where they don't kill themselves in the process.
And I would just to complement, we've seen the same thing, I would say, during COVID, and now with the new challenges of like the war in Ukraine, etc. The communication from the top, from the beginning, at the CEO level, at the country president level of Schneider, the transparency, saying we all in this together, sharing when we don't know, making statements, imperfect because we didn't have all of the info, etc. That really created a sense of togetherness, and the purpose, the extra energy to go the extra mile. Because we were labeled as essential workers, like people were like, okay, we do need to keep our customers functioning, to sometimes giving some material to hospitals, or like in Ukraine, giving some stuff for the rebuilding, etc. But we also see that right now we arrive at the end of that. Like people are worn down. There's only so much they could do. So we have run on this extra energy for so long. Now it's about, okay, how will we manage the inevitable dip that is happening already right now? I don't remember in which survey I was seeing today that 51% of employees say that they are burned out or on the verge of burnout. Whether it's the medical definition of a burnout, I don't know, but still, like a lot of people, 1 employee out of 2, and that was a global survey, are saying that today. So in Schneider, it must not be different. So I think it's again about training our managers and our HR. How can we detect that? How can we make sure that people are doing those self-checking to know where they are? And how will we manage that? Because a lot of the people I've, let's say, interviewed since I took the role are acknowledging that. They're saying, yes, I feel like people are kind of worn down, or they're very, very tired. But at the same time, they're not necessarily revising the objectives based on that. Fred knows that very well. We have big teams in India, in Bangalore. In India, the market is insane. Like the people have gone through COVID in crazy situations. Now we have people interviewing. They don't even show up the first day that they're supposed to, because they had 3 offers in the meantime. So we have the same priorities, but you have like 50% of the workforce sometimes in some teams. So it's how do you manage that? Because the business priorities is such with the supply chain crisis and all of the crises that it's very hard for people to navigate that. So it's we have to change the paradigm and see how do we put actually mental health, physical health in the versus our priorities, and what it means for our bottom line and our shareholders, which is something we are figuring out right now, but we don't have the solution yet.
Where is that conversation coming from? not from the perspective of employees asking for help and support, but in terms of solving the problem within the organization.
It's at the XCOM level for us. And it's actually coming from weak signals. Like a month ago, we organized a call with one of our mental health partner, the Langley Group, on it was called "How to Deal with Your Emotions in a time of crisis," and we did that for Ukraine and for the neighboring countries mostly, but we invited the whole company, and we gave people only 10 days because the people on the ground were telling us we need that. So, and usually when you give 10 days to people, there's like, I don't know, 200, 500 people showing up. There were 1,500 people showing up, which shows the need, and the vulnerability of people was amazing. So that's more from the bottom up, but at the top, I know there was an XCOM recently, and they talked about that. So now it's at that level. And again, the seat at the table that we gained during the pandemic will help, because all CHRO was cascading down and say, hey, what are we doing now to address that very quickly?
So one topic we touched on earlier was about innovation, and Angela had some stories to share about innovation at your organization. Can you share some of how the organization either handled innovation, because that's what you're doing, you're solving a very difficult problem and you need innovation to do it. How did you handle it during the pandemic, if at all? And now that you're back hybrid, how is it functioning in the organization?
Yeah, I mean, innovation is like our bread and butter, right? That's what we do, come up with innovative ideas and approaches to again, try to cure cancer. You know, I think it was so much easier in some ways before, right? When everybody was in the office or in the lab, you get, as we've said, these spontaneous interactions that spark a new idea. And I think we had to contrive that to a certain extent when there was more of a workforce working from home, or when it was asynchronous, if you will. And, you know, I think, again, it's having these forums where you're working as cross-functionally, you're engaging people as cross-functionally as possible to recognize that ideas can come from different places, and just sharing information more broadly. I think that's one way that we can and did do it. And I think it's just making sure that you're keeping that front and center. So employees are always reminded that ideas matter, that they should be sharing their ideas with others, that they should be talking about these things. To the extent that we could encourage leaders to have time where people could come together, either in a Zoom room or, you know, whatever that was. I think that's important. And then it's recognizing when it happens. So you can have these great ideas or have these sparks that go off, but if they just kind of die in the vine, if nothing is followed through, if those don't get communicated out, then it becomes harder for others to take that mantle and really drive the charge. So again, I think it's really all comes down to communications and leaders and managers fostering environments that not only allow for, but almost demand that people are thinking a bit differently and sharing information a bit differently and with a different audience. So yeah, not particularly specific, but you know, I think again, cross-functional work, communication, and really just trying to contrive as many situations where you're putting people together that may not naturally be together. Again, those Friday breakout groups, the easiest thing that any team or company can do. And I think we've seen some really great ideas get sparked.
Great, thank you. The last two topics to discuss, one we've touched on a little bit, is retention, and then diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Fred, did you want to add anything to our conversation about retention? Did the bank do anything different than you normally do around retention, or?
We put aside some money on specific bonus pool for people who really went the extra mile, because we wanted to do that. We did a little bit more off cycle, so increase because we saw some resources really were on the verge of leaving the company, and there were some resources we couldn't afford to lose. So this is where you do what it takes to make sure you keep them up and running, and we've done that in the past. I think retention, to the point we discussed before, it's not just about money. It's about, your manager, how he's going to manage you, the sense of purpose you're going to give them, how you create this kind of environment of collaboration across everyone. So people have the feeling you have their back. They have a sense of purpose. They understand how they contribute to the well-being of not only the company, but the communities, and the shareholders as well. And that's what helps keeping people together.
Great, thank you. Our last topic is diversity, equity, inclusion, and we have the most expert person here to answer that.
6 months in the job. So
It doesn't matter.
Got you immediately.
So I outlined earlier that with COVID, there are additional challenges now around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if you could just share some of the things that you've seen in your organization or that you're leading the charge for, or see that you might need to do in the future going forward, that you mind sharing?
that could be an entire
I know.
conference. So I'll get to a couple of points besides the traditional. Of course, when you think about DEI, you think about women, you think about LGBT, people with disability, generations, race and ethnicity. All of that is on the table. We have a big focus in Schneider on women still. We've made a lot of progress, especially at the top, but we still have a frozen middle where the women representation, promotion, etc. is still an issue. And pretty much in every country, so still a big thing where we are also committed externally. And now we're putting a big focus on generations and people with disability. And so that's one thing. The other thing is there's no well-being without psychological safety, and there's no psychological safety without inclusion. So those two topics, and it's not because I am the head of DEI and well-being that I say that, is because it's true, right? You have to take care of both. So we set ourselves the unreasonable or utopian ambition to be the most inclusive and caring company in the world, which basically means that we cater to those two things. So inclusion and well-being go hand in hand. And we've seen that with the pandemic, some of the things we talked about, especially on collaboration, the increase of digitization is excluding more people, because we went very fast on digitizing all of our interactions by necessity, and in a way, thank God the pandemic happened in 2020 and not in the beginning of the 2000s, because we had the means to respond to that business continuity, right? But a lot of people are excluded from that, and they don't necessarily say it because there's a stigma of, oh, I don't know how to use that, and you're not there to read the body language to see that. So it's about, again, equipping the managers to go and have those conversations. Hey, you are more quiet than you used to be. Is there something I can, and the managers, like all of us, are completely overwhelmed, etc. So they don't necessarily will take the time, because it's not serendipitous interactions anymore. It has to be intentional, and your agenda fills up pretty quickly. So do you make the time to do that? So there's a very important point there on creating what some call an inclusion instinct in managers, and making sure that you put managers, you put people in positions of managers who have that instinct, or you train them to have that instinct. Positive psychology or this kind of thing, Kara, we talked about. Empathy becomes a critical skill for managers, and so is vulnerability. Sharing the stories that managers are going through about, what did it mean for their mental health to go through all of that, etc. It goes such a long way. And there's a very, let's say, different, tolerance is not the right word, but let's say cultural acceptance of vulnerability depending on the cultures. In Ukraine right now, for instance, the leaders in Ukraine say, we don't want to put money on psychological help for our employees. We don't do that here. But they do need it because they have never been through a trauma such as that and they don't see it, so we are trying to help them, but it's very, very hard to fight it. So I would say overall, I've gone from driving KPIs to increase diversity to becoming almost like chief resilience officers or things like that. And I would say, yeah, the number one priority, besides all of the regular increased representations, etc., is changing the fabric of the organization to make sure all leaders are inclusive and caring and have this instinct, because otherwise you can put all the KPIs you want and you can even increase your representation, but if you don't have the right welcome and fostering of that so that people belong, then people will leave or they will be miserable.
Great,
And
thank you.
beyond well-being, we need diverse voices to feel safe enough to speak up, because it's diverse voices that allow companies to see their own organizational blind spots. Because if they can't see their own organizational
100%.
blind spots, they won't be able to integrate and stay competitive.
Yes.
So
I have in
that's
mind
the
that
business case
culture,
of
in
that.
some culture, is very difficult
Yes.
to do. So I think Melbourne probably exposed to that. Do that in India and in China or in Japan, which is even worse, in my opinion. Challenging the boss is not part of the culture there. So educating people is extremely difficult.
A whole other conversation
Oh,
for another evening. So up until this point, our conversation around work-life during these times has been focused on challenges, upset, stresses, and being sensitive to what other people might be going through, especially at home. But I think we're at a point where we can start to reflect and start thinking about what are some of the positive things that have come out of the experience of the past 2 years. So I'd like to know, what have been the gifts and opportunities that have emerged during this pandemic or have come out of this pandemic for you personally, as well as for your companies?
Sorry, I mean, I think there actually are a lot, right? It's, again, I like to flip all these things on their heads a little bit. So I think if we think about some of the gifts that have come from the pandemic, access is one of them. Think of how many people now can attend virtual conferences that they couldn't have attended before. So access to information, access to people in different countries and cultures and professions. I think access is huge. And I think from a company perspective, that actually has also some nice implications for the bottom line and for time. We don't have to travel to every meeting. We don't have to travel to every conference. We can actually do things occasionally, selectively, remotely. And that, again, I think is a real gift. I've certainly enjoyed that through the pandemic. And I think from a company perspective, the other, and again, I think this comes down to access, is access to talent. Our company was one that we really didn't want people working remotely in the beginning. We didn't think they could. Everybody was in the lab at the bench, and we wanted everybody else around them cheering them on and innovating with them. But now we recognize, look, we can still deliver against our goals in this more hybrid way, which also means we're opening up access to talent that may be in different parts of the country or even world that can bring unique skill sets and points of view to our company. That's freed us, right? That's been incredibly liberating and opened up a world of opportunity, both for us as a company, but also to some potentially underrepresented talent that could never come to Cambridge, Massachusetts and work at a biotech company. So I think access would be like the bottom line, personally and professionally. I think that's been a real gift.
I completely agree with you, Angela. We had exactly the same move. We were hiring historically where we had presence. Now, 30 to 35% of our workforce is fully remote and in every state of the US. So we definitely have expanded the range of how we search for talent, and we pick talent wherever they are. That doesn't really matter. Personally, there is 2 things I can mention. It's just a small personal story. When the pandemic started, I sold my house and I bought a new one. issue is in between. There was 2.5 months where we don't have a house. So we lived in some kind of big apartment complex with 500 people. You couldn't open the window. You had probably 300 students in that building. And we were living in a small space where it was the beginning of the pandemic. So I was working 18 hours per day, every day in the living room, in an apartment where you had the living room, which was also the dining room and the kitchen, and we had 2 bedrooms. So the rest of the family was living in the bedrooms. So 2 learnings from that. First, my family didn't explode, so I have a very strong bond. Second, the moment we moved into our house and we had access to a small garden, it makes you rethink of, how being just able to live outside during the pandemic, spend some hours taking the sun, how good all the benefit you can get, in your mental health and stuff like that is unbelievable. So very, very happy I'm not living in this kind of apartment complex anymore.
Well, for Schneider, I think thank you digitization. That's what I would say. Right? We were starting to migrate from Skype for Business to Teams during the pandemic, and we shifted completely to Teams. And thank you, because Skype was just a disaster, and Teams is fantastic. So again, it creates some side effects on the exclusion of some people who are not necessarily digitally savvy or as much as it requires, but it really changed the paradigm of remote, synchronous and asynchronous collaborations, etc. So brought us to another level there. Same on the learning and development thing. It's back to the access point that you mentioned, Angela. I mentioned it before. People would have never thought that digital learning could be efficient. And now, at the time, I was in charge of digital learning, and we were at 50-50 between, or we were actually at 60-40 learning hours of in-class versus digital, which was already really good. Like we were at 40% of digital hours. At the end of 2020, we were at 80% of digital. And now we are at 75% of digital. So it has come back a little bit, but not that much. And I think, again, we'd never go back to where we were before. Now, personally, I kind of rediscovered myself in 2020. I divorced in 2018. And 2018, 2019, we kind of finding a way to live by myself with my kids every other week. And in 2020, 2021, I finally had the time to reflect. I lost 20 pounds. I built a fence in my backyard. I became a Reiki master. And in 2022, I ran a marathon, which I prepared. So I would say that it was a very introspective year, but very good, in a very, very good way that brought me to a better version of myself. So I really try to share that experience with my kids as well, which is always keep on reflecting, and you're always capable of more than what you think you are. So pushing yourself is a good thing to be even prouder and bettering yourself.
There's always a gift and opportunity if we're patient enough to wait for it to reveal itself.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. What a great discussion. Do we have time for a few questions?
We do. I think.
Well, we should ask Fred, really.
Number one is how much time can we stay, and number two is it's up to you all. Usually we break and people stay around and have further conversation. So
We have a few people online, though.
yes, and so sometimes people online have stayed and listened to the conversation. So if we have some time to stay, we can definitely share more conversation.
Sure.
Great, thank you.
Does anyone have any questions?
Let's ask from the online folks first. Would anybody like to ask a question from the online audience?
Can you hear us first?
We hear you.
Jacques is trying to speak.
It was a very good discussion. So I have no question, but great discussion, very interesting input. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Jacques.
Thank you, Jacques.
Thanks, Jacques. Good to see you again. We were at the same conference earlier today. Following each other.
Long time ago, 2 hours.
So I've got a bit of an observation. If this is a good time.
Sure, of course.
So I was asking, but none of you could probably see this in the midst of the point that there was this enormous burnout. People are burnt out or they're very close to burnt out. And I asked the question to the team here, why? And didn't get a real answer.
So we could barely hear you. You will have to repeat your question more loudly because we
okay. Is this a little better?
Yes.
Better? Okay. So it just seemed to me that there is a complete acceptance that 50% plus of your teams are burnt out or about to. Is that the right takeaway? Nodding
I hope
heads.
not.
Yeah, maybe more.
But I didn't understand why. And the other takeaway I've got is you've got two major objectives: collaboration and team building, and innovation, but they're not being met effectively. And yet there's this other great belief that there's this new great work-life balance. And I'm looking at that saying those two things are in conflict, maybe not. And I'd love to understand more about this, why maybe that's the organizational blind spot, and are we really in a post-pandemic moment, or is this the pandemic throwing more stuff at us and we just haven't caught up? Be quiet.
Maybe on the second part of your question, I don't think collaboration and innovation and hybrid work are contradictory. And I was reading a lot because I work 4 days a week for about 18 months. That also happened during the pandemic, so that was great. And I was reading a lot on all of the measurements after the big pilots that have been done in Japan for Microsoft, in other companies on the 4-day week. Productivity rise in every case, 5% to 40%, measured differently. But, and it's the same for employees working in hybrid conditions. All of them report gain in productivity. And some of them are okay to be paid less, some of them are not paid less, but the productivity rises nonetheless. So if you can make a correlation between productivity and innovation and collaboration, then you have your answer. I don't think it's a direct correlation, but at least you're not getting worse. Then on the 50% of burnout, I don't know. It's a figure I quoted from a study that issued recently, and I don't think it means clinically burned out, meaning you're not functioning and you're borderline depression, etc. Are people worn down? I think yes. Is it 50%? I don't know, but there's too many of them for sure. So, and why? It's a combination of factors. I think it's the exhaustion from 2 years of running on purpose and fulfilling a mission. Digital sucking up a lot of energy, more, and having to now switching from in-person to digital. I know for me, a day like that is amazing. I was at a conference earlier today, face-to-face. I'm doing that right now. I'm going to be completely exhausted for the rest of the week because I don't know how to do meetings all day long in person. I feel socially inadequate in a way, and it pumps up a lot of energy. And I think, joke aside, a lot of people are feeling that. Not to mention me, I'm super privileged because I'm in a global function. There's no sense of urgency as some people in the front line have, dealing with supply chain issues, customer yelling at them because you give them a delivery time and it's postponed every 2 weeks because the parts didn't arrive. That is mentally and physically exhausting, for sure.
And then there's everything outside of the workplace too, which drags us. Yeah. Just turning on the news, it's the instability of the entire environment.
And I think it was also the fact being constrained on everything.
Not being
You
able to
couldn't
see
go
the
to the
people
movie
you want to see.
theater, you couldn't
Right.
run on some boulevard, even in Providence, where we live. You couldn't do, there was so much constraint, I think, not only professionally, but also personally, which I think participates to this kind of burnout syndrome that you're seeing with everyone.
And worry about family members
Yeah.
and friends and vulnerable.
And Fred, you had to leave this situation for 2 months between your houses.
And people
Some
do that
people
for
have
done
to
that
do
for
that.
2 years. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a daily life. So.
Does that answer your question or give you some more insight into why?
It does, but I've still got a whole bunch of people that apparently want to be home and that for this great work-life balance, and yet everybody's stressed out still. So you would think those numbers would be much lower if this was all working.
Yeah, and I don't think we can be complacent and accept those numbers either, right? I think it's not an acceptable state of the world. If we have 51% of people in a perpetual state of burnout, clinical or otherwise, that's not acceptable, right? So I think as leaders of our organizations, we all need to be listening, paying attention, and maybe helping people try to manage to that more effectively.
Yeah, so I have a question, more an observation. I think it's kind of linked to Bill's comments as well. If you reflect on the mental health question, sure, at the beginning there was so much uncertainty and people were in lockdown mode, so huge, stress on everyone. Now, there's still the environment, as you said, with the war in Ukraine and these kinds of bad news. But if, companies provide this flexibility, I would expect that potentially the picture would be actually less pressure and better mental health than prior, to the pandemic. So I wonder if you have done like regular and recent surveys or seen something in that domain that would point to more of an uptick, in actually better, more well-being, consistently with some of the things you said where engagement actually seemed to have picked up, during the pandemic. So, I'm just wondering to make sure that mental health is not something that we are addressing as, something that is still rising today, or is it alleviated a little bit by the new flexibility that people find in the work environment?
I don't have quantitative data to speak to it yet. I will in about a month. But I will tell you qualitatively and just anecdotally, I heard a lot of stress and angst and anxiety and depression in our employees, particularly those that were not coming in often, because again, we wanted our support staff to be working at home more often. So our lab workers had more space and felt more comfortable and safe in the office. As those employees have started coming back and felt more comfortable and free to come back into the office, again, to the extent that they're able and comfortable and willing, I've seen a shift. I've just seen a lightness. I've seen more happiness. I've seen a bit more joy in the workplace. I'm fully expecting that's going to translate in numbers, right, to some improvements there. But I don't have the hard data just yet. But anecdotally, I very much see it.
Completely agree, and I actually never thought about that. I don't think we have been able to measure yet the potential impact, positive impact of the flexibility at work on mental health, because it happened under constraints, right? So it was not like, oh great, we decided we would do that because it's great for well-being. We decided to do that because the world shut down. So we're still living on the tail of that. It's going to take a little bit more time. And same as Angela, our employee survey is just like running right now for 2022. So we will have more clues on the effect of comparison between 2020 and 2021. But it's a bit too soon. But it's an interesting angle to see if that's going to have a positive impact, because we hear the opposite.
Yeah, because I'm thinking there are two thoughts. One is sometimes careful what you wish for. So you wish full flexibility, but then there's also the syndrome of being a bit isolated, and you don't necessarily are fully conscious of it. And the other one is people like to have control. So, if okay, I'm coming in 2 days or 3 days a week, but I pick the days or things like that, usually that helps with well-being. So I'm just wondering what kind of pictures might be emerging. And maybe it's within specific managers' teams that you see different data points.
It'd be interesting to kind of surface some of the good practices in the space.
Any other questions from? Oh,
I'm
go ahead.
curious if there's a segment, you know, of the employee base that is just not ready to come back yet. You know, is it a third? Is it a half? Or is most of your employee base coming in, but just for, you know, 2 or 3 days a week?
Difficult to, I think, give you a rule. So the rule of thumb, I can tell you, at least for my team, I would probably say around 10 to 15% didn't want to come back to the office. Okay, yeah. So they did everything they could, not even to come back one day, to have some kind of interaction. They were not comfortable doing it. Then you will have the other side of the equation, probably 15-20% of the people, they wanted to be back in the office because they were, you know, longing for this kind of human interaction, relationship they had with other people. And I think the rest was a little bit more in between. They wanted to come back, not 5 days per week, happy with having more flexibility. So I think for me, you see, depending how people are. Some are more extroverts, some are more introverts, some live more through day-to-day interaction and building relationship. Some prefer to be, you know, by themselves. And I think this was probably amplified with what we've seen. But again, it's my rule of thumb on what I'm seeing in my office, which is not necessarily representative of the rest.
But is there the possibility?
This was starting a database marketing company, one of the world's first B2B database marketing companies, and it's all about segments and understanding various segments. And I'm just curious if we really know which segments. You know, is there a scaredy cat segment? Is there a, you know, complacent segment? I'm curious to know what those key segments are within the workforce and how you can deal with them differently.
But I think good luck with that because there is so many components. So you had some people with real health issues who couldn't expose themselves. Okay, you had some people with childcare issues who had different issues to manage. You have people with, you know, elderly who needed to be home to take care of their parents. There is so many different use cases there. It's going to be very difficult to find any kind of rules you can apply across the board.
Exponential implications, exponential problems associated with this whole experience.
Yeah, the trail's long on this, for sure.
But I just wanted to mention, you're implying, Bill, a little bit that there could be a segment of the population that could be taking a little advantage of the situation. And
no, that's not where I was going.
No.
I mean,
okay.
No. Maybe there is. I don't know. That was not.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
what
I
Elon
guess.
Musk will tell you.
What?
That's what Elon Musk will tell you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I would, for those people who do think that, I would say the data shows that that's not true. You know, we for a year and a half, people worked their butt off at home, and the company asked them to, and they said sure. And so, if you feel that there is, as a leader, if you feel that you're making this decision to bring people back because you don't trust them, we talked about trust, then that's not the answer to bring them back. I think
that word passion.
What?
That word passion that was used earlier. I mean, the passion of your employees, if you can just get more of that.
Exactly. I think human nature is to be successful, produce, do what your leader is asking you to do. It's just that before pandemic, we asked everybody to drive into an office and kill ourselves with commuting an hour and a half to the office one way. I was a victim of it for 8 years. And then I stopped and I said, I'm not doing this again. This is way before the pandemic. And when you are forced to stay home. And the reality is, oh my gosh, my life is so much more improved because I can be with my family or do other things if I don't have a family or whatever. That work-life balance is so tangible and valuable. And of course I'm going to say, no, I don't want to go back every day. So I think just the data speaks to it.
Well, I think you make a good point. I don't think anybody wakes up and says, I want to do a bad job today, right? I think people want to, especially if they're working for a company that they believe in and they really are working on the same goals, they want to do a good job. And then it's really just incumbent upon the company, the managers, the leaders, to help give them the tools and resources to do that in the situation that they're in. And that's what the pandemic, I think, has shown us. We can do that.
100%. Don't make the rule on the exceptions,
Right.
or on assuming that people want to make the rule, assuming that people, it's a basic, for me, a human principle and an agile principle as well. In the Agile Manifesto, it's the rule is that you think everybody's doing the best they can at every point in time, right? And that should be your North Star, and not thinking, oh, what about if people want to cheat, and let's put the rules around that. That's
Assume the best in people.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, thank you very much. So on this note, I think we are going to close. Thank you very much for sharing your experience. I hope that you enjoyed it and got a lot from it.
Thank you.
And if you are not following our HR forum yet, you can have information on our website, or we also have a LinkedIn group that you can join to know about the program in the fall. Thank you, Cliff.
Thank you.